You've done this before. You're good at something, genuinely good. Maybe it's playing an instrument. Maybe it's writing. Maybe it's coding, or cooking, or telling stories in a room full of friends. And when you're alone, doing it, it flows. It feels almost effortless, like the thing is doing itself through you. And then someone walks in. They don't say anything. They're not judging. Maybe they're even smiling. But something shifts. You feel it before you think it. Something tightens. Not in your body exactly. Deeper than that. In the space between your intention and your action. Suddenly, you're not drawing anymore. You're watching yourself draw. And the moment you become the audience of your own performance, the performance gets worse. Every musician knows this. Every athlete. Every surgeon who has ever felt their hands hesitate when the head of the hospital walks into the operating theater. The paradox is almost cruel. The better you are at something, the more you have to lose in front of an audience. And the harder the audience makes it to access what made you good in the first place. This isn't stage fright. This isn't a lack of confidence. This is something older, stranger, and far more interesting than either of those things. This is your brain betraying you, in precisely the way it was designed to. In 1908, two psychologists named Robert Yerkes and John Dodson noticed something peculiar in their experiments. When they added pressure to a task, when the stakes were raised, when others were watching, performance didn't simply improve or decline, it split. For simple tasks, basic mechanical things, added pressure helped. It sharpened focus. But for complex tasks, the kind that required skill, nuance, and internalized knowledge, that same pressure caused people to collapse inward. The name for this is choking, but that word is misleading. It implies weakness. It implies failure of character. What's actually happening is far more precise and far more human. When you learn a skill deeply enough, it eventually migrates. It moves from the conscious, deliberate, slow-thinking part of your brain, what psychologists call explicit processing, and gets compressed into something faster, more automatic, more embodied. It lives in your implicit system now. Your procedural memory. Your muscle memory. The part of you that doesn't think. It just does. This is mastery. This is what years of practice actually build. Not a bigger library of conscious rules, but a more efficient, wordless knowing. And here is the trap. When someone watches you, your brain, wired for social survival, wired to care about how you appear to other members of the tribe, pulls that implicit knowledge back into conscious scrutiny. It yanks the skill out of the body and into the spotlight of deliberate thought. Suddenly you're thinking about where your fingers go. Suddenly you're narrating your own process. Suddenly every micro-decision that used to happen invisibly now requires your full, slow, anxious attention. Psychologists call this reinvestment, the reinvestment of conscious attention into automatic processes. And it doesn't just slow you down. It actively interferes with the architecture of your skill. Think about that for a moment. The very act of being seen can temporarily dismantle something you spent years building. And the deeper the skill, the more catastrophic the disruption. A beginner barely notices. They're already thinking consciously about everything. But an expert has the most to lose. Because expertise is almost entirely implicit, almost entirely beyond words. This is why great athletes sometimes fall apart at the Olympics. Why professional musicians can suddenly forget a piece they've played 1,000 times. Why someone who can hold a room effortlessly, with a story among friends, will freeze when given a microphone. The gaze of others doesn't just put you on trial, it puts your own competence on trial, before a jury made entirely of your own anxious thoughts. So what do you do with this? You could try to ignore it, to pretend the audience isn't there. Most performance coaches will tell you to do exactly this, and it almost never works, because denial requires its own form of attention. You could try to perform perfectly, to somehow bridge the gap between watching yourself and being yourself through sheer force of will. That doesn't work either, because the trying is itself the problem. There is a philosophy, one of the oldest in the world, that looked at this exact human problem and offered something quieter and stranger and more useful than any technique. It is called Taoism. Taoism emerged in ancient China, rooted in the writings of a man named Lao Tzu, a keeper of archives who, according to legend, grew so disillusioned with human striving that he rode a water buffalo out into the wilderness and was never seen again. But before he left, he wrote 81 short verses. They became the Tao Te Ching. At the heart of Taoism is a concept called Wu Wei, often translated as non-doing or effortless action. It does not mean passivity. It does not mean laziness. It means something far more precise, the art of moving in accord with the nature of things, without forcing, without straining, without watching yourself move. The Taoists observed what every master eventually discovers, that the highest form of any skill is invisible to the person performing it. The great calligrapher does not think about the brush. The great archer does not think about the arrow. The great chef, Lao Tzu writes about this directly, does not think about the knife. The knife finds the spaces between. This is not mysticism. This is a precise description of implicit knowledge, of the procedural memory modern neuroscience has now confirmed. The Taoists simply saw it 2,500 years earlier, and their solution to the observer effect was not to remove the observer. It was to stop performing for them. In Taoist thought, the moment you begin performing for an audience, even an internal audience of your own judgment, you have stepped outside of the Tao. You are no longer acting from your nature. You are acting from your image of your nature. And images are always smaller than the real thing. The practice, and it is a practice, not a switch, is learning to return to the work rather than returning to the performance of the work. It is asking, not how does this look, but what does this ask of me right now? It is the difference between playing music for the listener and playing music as the listener. Lao Tzu writes, "The sage does not compete, and therefore no one can compete with him." He's not talking about arrogance. He is talking about the liberation that comes from exiting the game of approval entirely. Not because you don't care about others, but because you have found something worth caring about more. The quiet fidelity to what the work actually requires. The watched feeling doesn't vanish, but its gravity weakens, because you are no longer orbiting someone else's gaze. You are orbiting the task. There is something worth sitting with here. The reason being watched makes you worse at what you're good at is not that you suddenly become less capable. Your years of practice don't disappear. Your knowledge isn't erased. What happens is simpler and more disorienting than that. You forget, briefly, who you are when no one is looking. And that forgetting, that gap between the self that knows and the self that performs knowing, is one of the more revealing experiences a human being can have, because it tells you something. It tells you that somewhere, in some part of you that doesn't use words, there is a version of you that is simply doing the thing without needing the thing to mean anything about you. That is the version worth returning to, not because it performs better, though it often does, but because it is closer to what you actually are, beneath the accumulated weight of being observed. The ancient Taoists didn't believe in self-improvement, exactly. They believed in self-return. The idea that what you're looking for was never outside of you. It just gets obscured by noise, by eyes, by the very hunger to be seen as the thing you already are. You already know how to do this. You knew before anyone was watching. If this found something in you, something quiet and true, consider staying. Not for the next algorithm, not for the streak, just because there's more of this to explore together.